They danced with vacant eyes, their limbs thrashing as if possessed by demons from the darkest pit. No music played, yet they moved endlessly, their shoes filling with blood that poured onto the streets of Strasbourg like unholy wine. These haunting words from historical documents describe the waking nightmare that was the dancing plague of 1518. Imagine watching as your beloved wife rises from bed one morning, her eyes suddenly glazing over, the light behind them extinguished as if her soul had been snatched away. Without warning or reason, she begins to dance, her movements jerky and inhuman, like a marionette controlled by unseen, sadistic hands. You try to restrain her, but her strength is supernatural, her fingers leaving bruises on your arms as she throws you aside. Her nails tear at her own clothing, her hair matted with sweat, her lips cracked and bleeding as she pants without pause. Days pass. She doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, doesn't even seem to breathe normally. The flesh of her feet sloughs off in chunks, yet still she dances. And the most terrifying part? She's smiling now, a rictus grin that never reaches her dead eyes. What malevolent power could transform ordinary townsfolk into writhing, dancing husks? What whispered curse could spread through a city like wildfire, leaving nothing but twitching corpses in its wake? Tonight, we descend into one of history's most blood-soaked mysteries, a plague that didn't kill with fever or boils, but with movement itself, dancing its victims straight into their graves. On July 14, 1518, Frau Troffea stepped into the narrow street outside her home in Strasbourg. Neighbors would later recount how she paused mid-step, her market basket dropping from suddenly rigid fingers. A strange shudder rippled through her body, like something worming its way beneath her skin. Her head snapped back with an audible crack. Then she began to dance. Her arms twisted at angles that threatened to snap bone. Her legs kicked and stomped, tearing her skirts. Her neck bent so far backward that onlookers swore they could see her face from behind. No music played to guide these grotesque movements, only the wet slapping of bloodied feet against stone and the rhythmic cracking of overtaxed joints. A physician's apprentice, hiding in the doorway of his master's shop, felt vomit rise in his throat as he watched. Her eyes, he wrote in trembling script, bulged from their sockets yet saw nothing. When we approached, they rolled back completely, showing only whites that reminded me of a cadaver's blind gaze. Most horrifying was her mouth, locked in a silent scream that never ceased, even as her lips tore from constant exposure to the elements. For 6 days, Frau Troffea danced without pause to urinate or defecate. The fluids simply ran down her legs, mixing with blood from her mutilated feet. The stench attracted flies that clouded around her like a black shroud, yet she seemed not to notice them crawling across her face, into her nostrils, between her lips. Physicians attempted remedies that became increasingly desperate. They strapped her to a wooden board, only to watch in horror as the thick leather restraints cut into her flesh while her body continued to writhe. They forced concoctions of nightshade and mandrake down her throat, which only seemed to fuel her frenzy. One doctor pressed red-hot irons to her feet, reasoning that pain would snap her free from the trance. She didn't even flinch, just danced atop her charred flesh with the same vacant expression. Then came the true terror. Like a demonic possession leaping from soul to soul, the dancing spread. A young mother who'd been watching Frau Troffea suddenly dropped her infant to the cobblestones with a sickening thud. The child's cries went unheeded as she joined the macabre ballet. A butcher's knife clattered to the ground as he began to twitch and jerk. A priest's eyes rolled back mid-prayer before he tore off his vestments and joined a growing circle of the damned. By the seventh day, the streets crawled with 34 possessed dancers, their movements synchronized in an unholy ceremony that even the most devout refused to watch. And in their ultimate folly, the town council decided not to stop the madness, but to give it a stage. The guild halls of Strasbourg, once places of merriment and community, transformed into chambers of abject horror. The wooden floors, soaked through with blood, sweat, and worse, softened to a pulp that squelched beneath the dancers' ravaged feet. The stench became so unbearable that even physicians tied herb-filled cloths across their faces, their eyes watering as they waded through the charnel house of still-living victims. Believing the afflicted needed to dance out whatever demon possessed them, the council hired musicians to play. This proved catastrophically misguided. The music seemed to call others like a siren's song, drawing healthy citizens into the frenzy. The piper's melodies, originally slow and measured, grew increasingly frantic as the musicians themselves became entranced by the hellish scene before them. The apprentice documented horrors that defied explanation. I watched a woman's ankle snap, the bone piercing through skin with an audible pop. She continued to dance upon the protruding shard, grinding it against the floor until the white bone wore down to a crimson stump. When we tried to remove her, she bit through a man's cheek to the teeth, tearing away flesh without releasing her jaw's grip. The dancers moved beyond human endurance. They danced through exhaustion, through critical dehydration that made their skin shrink against their skulls, through internal bleeding that caused them to vomit black matter resembling coffee grounds. Yet still they continued. Some, in brief moments of lucidity, begged onlookers to kill them, to end their torment, before their eyes glazed over again and they resumed their relentless movement. By August, the guild halls could no longer contain the horror. More than 400 dancers now thrashed day and night, their collective movements so powerful they cracked support beams in the ancient buildings. The council erected platforms in public squares, creating raised stages that put the afflicted on display like grotesque exhibitions. They believed sunshine might cure the dancers. Instead, it baked them alive, their skin blistering and peeling away in sheets while they continued their mad choreography. Death came in hideous forms. Some dancers' hearts simply burst within their chests, causing them to spray blood from their mouths mid-step before collapsing. Others danced until their brain stems hemorrhaged, their eyes suddenly flooding with blood before they dropped like puppets with cut strings. The most unfortunate lasted weeks, their bodies consuming themselves from within until they resembled dancing skeletons barely covered by translucent skin. And still, horrifically, new victims joined them every day. In desperation, the clergy orchestrated what would become known as the Procession of the Damned. Priests in black vestments led the afflicted dancers out of Strasbourg toward the shrine of Saint Vitus, 16 miles away in Saverne. The dancers wore red shoes, not by choice, but because their footwear had been stained crimson with their own blood. Crosses were painted on the soles in consecrated oil, leaving macabre footprints along the pilgrimage route like breadcrumbs to hell. The physician's apprentice, now hollow-eyed from weeks of bearing witness, followed the procession. His journal entries grew increasingly disturbed. The dancers convulse when holy water touches their skin, as if it burns them like acid. Some speak in languages they should not know, ancient tongues my master claims have been dead for centuries. A child of 9 describes in perfect detail the interior of Saint Vitus's tomb, though she has never left Strasbourg until now. The journey lasted 3 agonizing days. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were lashed to carts and dragged, their bodies bouncing against the rutted earth, skin shredding against stones. Their blood left a continuous trail that attracted wolves and carrion birds that stalked the procession like harbingers of death. At the shrine, priests performed rituals that resembled exorcisms more than healing ceremonies. Dancers were forced to crawl beneath a stone archway engraved with the saint's likeness, their bodies contorted in positions that dislocated shoulders and hips. Some claimed to see the carved face of Saint Vitus animate, its stone eyes following them, its granite lips mouthing silent condemnations. "They scream of visions," wrote the apprentice. One man claws at his eyes, claiming Saint Vitus shows him visions of his own entrails being devoured by rats. A woman shrieks that the saint has filled her womb with dancing maggots that will birth more cursed dancers. Most disturbing is the miller's son who speaks with the saint's voice, a deep, resonant tone impossible from his child's throat, pronouncing judgment on Strasbourg for sins I dare not transcribe. Local priests preached that the plague was divine punishment for participating in forbidden dances throughout the previous year. Carnivals where men and women had touched too intimately, where pagan rhythms had infiltrated Christian celebrations. The dancers, they claimed, were paying for collective sin with their bodies. Survivors later described feeling as though invisible hands manipulated their limbs like puppets. Some swore they saw Saint Vitus himself dancing beside them, mirroring their movements with a mocking grin that split his face unnaturally wide. Others reported hearing music no one else could perceive, drums that matched their heartbeats, pipes that mimicked their screams. The shrine offered no salvation. For every dancer who collapsed at the saint's feet and claimed healing, 3 more began dancing on the journey back to Strasbourg. The apprentice noted how those cured developed a haunted 1,000-yard stare. They never smiled again, never spoke of what they had seen while dancing. Many would later hang themselves in barn lofts or drown themselves in wells, leaving no explanation beyond cryptic messages. "He's still dancing inside me. The saint has called me back." As summer blazed into autumn, a traveling physician arrived with a theory that briefly kindled hope. Perhaps the dancers were victims not of divine wrath, but of earthly poison, ergot fungus contaminating the rye harvest. The apprentice, desperate for rational explanation, followed this newcomer to the grain stores where they sifted through sacks of flour with trembling hands. What they found chilled them more than any supernatural explanation. Dark, twisted kernels nestled among the healthy grain, ergot growths resembling witch fingers or blackened human teeth. When crushed, they released spores that made the air shimmer strangely, as if reality itself warped around them. "We experimented," the apprentice recorded, "feeding contaminated bread to a dog. What followed haunts my dreams still. The animal's spine arched backward until we heard it snap. Its legs moved in a grotesque parody of dance for hours before blood poured from every orifice. Most disturbing, it made no sound, not even whimpers of pain, just stared at us with the same vacant expression as the human dancers." The physician collected bread samples from afflicted households. Slicing them open revealed horrors. Veins of black mold running through the loaves like diseased blood vessels, moving patterns that seemed to rearrange themselves when not directly observed. In one home, the apprentice discovered a half-eaten loaf with a distinctly face-like pattern of spores that appeared to be grinning. Survivors interviewed between dancing episodes described nightmares that began days before their physical symptoms. Visions of bread dough that pulsated like living flesh, of grain fields where the stalks screamed when cut, of meals that whispered to them as they ate. One victim claimed his bread had begged not to be consumed before he took the first bite that damned him. The physician's experiments grew increasingly disturbing. He fed ergot-laden bread to prisoners, offering freedom to those who survived his tests. None did. One man's fingers elongated several inches before the bones erupted through the skin. A woman's tongue swelled until it protruded from her mouth like a purple snake, still moving rhythmically after she had died from suffocation. Yet for all its promise, the ergot theory failed to explain crucial elements of the plague. If poison was responsible, why did the victims dance in such uncanny unison? How could contaminated food provide the supernatural strength that allowed elderly women to dance for days without rest? And most troublingly, why did new victims fall into dancing after merely watching others, without consuming any bread at all? The traveling physician, increasingly manic in his investigations, began to display symptoms himself: twitching fingers, dilated pupils, rambling theories that grew more paranoid by the hour. By his final day in Strasbourg, he insisted the ergot itself was sentient, a malevolent intelligence using human bodies as vessels. The council expelled him from the city, but not before the apprentice witnessed him begin to dance at the city gates, his medical bag dropping forgotten as he joined the afflicted in their endless nightmare. By September, the dancing stopped as mysteriously as it began. Nearly 400 people had participated in the macabre spectacle. Dozens lay dead, hearts ruptured, brains hemorrhaged, bodies simply worn to nothing through months of constant movement. The survivors were changed forever, their eyes containing a darkness that made neighbors cross to the opposite side of the street. The physician's apprentice stood alone in the abandoned guild hall where so many had danced their lives away. The floorboards were worn through in places, revealing the earth beneath, earth now mixed with blood and tissue that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The stench of death had seeped into the very walls, ensuring the building would never again host weddings or celebrations. He ran his fingers over his journal, hundreds of pages documenting incomprehensible horror. What had he witnessed? Hysteria? Demonic possession? Poison? The true answer remains elusive even today, but his final entry suggests a more terrifying possibility: that the human mind, under sufficient pressure, can manifest nightmares into flesh. "I dream now of dancing," he wrote in shaking script. "My feet move beneath the sheets while I sleep. I wake to find my shoes placed neatly beside the bed, though I distinctly remember putting them in the chest. Sometimes I hear distant music when no one is playing. I fear the plague has not ended. It merely sleeps, waiting to awaken again when we have forgotten its face." Consider more recent examples that echo this ancient horror: the 1962 Tanganyika laughter epidemic that seized schoolgirls in uncontrollable hysteria for months, or the 2011 twitching outbreak in New York where teenagers developed sudden, inexplicable tics and seizures. Each time, science scrambles for explanation, yet something primordial escapes our understanding. In our modern world of viral media and collective anxiety, how thin is the membrane between suggestion and physical manifestation? What ancient terror lies dormant in our collective consciousness, waiting for the right conditions to resurface? The dancing plague reminds us of our fragility, that beneath our civilized veneer lurks a terrifying vulnerability to contagions that infect not the body, but the mind itself. Perhaps most disturbing of all, historical records show similar dancing outbreaks have occurred roughly every century since 1518. If the pattern holds, we are overdue for another visitation of this inexplicable horror. Tonight, before you sleep, listen carefully. Do you hear distant, rhythmic thumping? Is it merely your heartbeat, or the first dancer of our generation, beginning the cycle anew?